welcome back. You're safe here. Let the day fall away. Tonight a story will unfold, not to stir you, but to settle you. Whether it's a whisper from a forgotten soul, a tale from a time long past, or a dream that never truly ended, close your eyes and let the story guide you home. High in the mountains, where the mist moved like breath and the sun barely pierced the trees, sat a quiet, crumbling temple. It was called Incense Rest, though few remembered that anymore. The villagers, once devout, had long ceased their pilgrimages. All that remained was the wind through prayer flags and the soft sweep of a monk's robes. His name was Master Hukin. Tall and lean, he moved like someone halfway between the world and whatever lay beyond it. His hair had silvered, though he still wore the old robes of deep saffron and dusk. Each morning he lit a single stick of incense in the temple's heart. It never seemed to burn down. The incense rested in a jade holder shaped like a lotus. Its smoke was pale, barely there, and carried a strange fragrance, neither sweet nor bitter, but full of memory. It curled around the temple pillars, wandered through doorways, and vanished before it could reach the world outside. When asked, Hukin would smile and say, "It waits for her." The villagers thought he was mad. She hadn't returned in years and perhaps never would. Some even whispered she'd been a ghost from the start. But the monk remembered. He remembered the rain-drenched afternoon when she arrived, her hair wet, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Her name had been Shenli. She'd come seeking silence or perhaps refuge. The city had bruised her, love had disappointed her, and she no longer trusted her own voice. That day the storm had followed her all the way into the mountains, and when she crossed the threshold of the temple, something in her stilled, as if a long-chased breath had finally caught up with her. Hukin had offered her tea. She had barely spoken, but her hands, small and calloused, had clutched the clay cup like it held more than warmth, like it held hope. That night she slept in the empty guest room, wrapped in an old blanket that smelled of cedar. Outside, the rain fell in steady rhythm. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Shenli didn't dream. She stayed for 13 days. During that time, she swept the leaves from the courtyard each morning. She followed Hukin during his daily rituals. She never asked about the incense, nor why it never seemed to shrink. But every morning she watched the smoke rise with the same stillness one might give a departing ship. On the 14th day she left. No goodbye, no letter, just her cup, washed and placed upside down. Hukin had not gone looking for her, but he'd begun to light the incense every day since. The villagers didn't understand, but he knew. The soul recognizes longing, and some prayers once spoken continue long after the voice is gone. Now years had passed. The temple had grown quieter. Moss crept between stone tiles. Paint flaked from wooden beams. Yet the incense still rose, as faithful as morning light. Hukin never told anyone what she had whispered in front of the statue. He had only heard the last sentence carried on the wind. "If I forget who I am, let the smoke remind me." And so he waited, not in sorrow, not in expectation, just a presence. Like the incense, soft, steady, and always rising. The city below the mountain had changed. Glass buildings now caught the morning sun. and electric trams whirred through streets that once knew only ox carts. Cafes buzzed with soft jazz and quiet discontent. In a narrow corner bookstore between a florist and a laundromat, Shenli wiped her hands on her apron and returned to shelving paperbacks. Her hair was shorter now, cut clean at the neck, dyed a shade darker than her natural black. She looked assembled, like someone who had rebuilt herself carefully, part by part. Customers came and went. Some lingered. Some left with pages full of borrowed wisdom. None ever guessed she had once climbed a mountain, looking for silence. But some mornings, especially after rain, she would pause in the middle of shelving a book and feel a strange warmth behind her ribs. A thin wisp of memory, like smoke fleeting, fragrant, and uninvited. She never spoke of the temple, not to co-workers, not even to herself. It had become a part of her she didn't quite know how to hold. Until the letter came. It arrived on handmade paper, folded precisely in thirds, with no return address. The ink was faded, but the strokes were unmistakably his. Master Huken had written only a few lines. The incense still burns. If you have remembered, then come. If you have not, still come. She read it 5 times before folding it again. She placed it under a stone on her knitstand, as if that would keep it from shifting the air around her. That night, she didn't sleep. In the morning, she went about her day like normal. Brewed coffee, watered her plants, opened the shop, greeted a man with a tie too tight, told a young girl where the poetry section was. But every moment felt like she was living from outside her own skin. By evening, she was standing at the edge of the city's old train station, a duffel bag at her side and her breath forming clouds in the cold. The train to the mountains still ran, though fewer took it now. The seats were cracked and the windows stained with time. Shenli sat by herself, fingers curled into her sleeves. As the train climbed higher, fog clung to the windows, like it recognized her. She didn't ask herself why she was going. Some returns don't ask permission. They unfold like instinct. At the last stop, only she stepped off. The station was empty, no attendant, just a sign swaying slightly in the wind. The path to the temple was overgrown, but her feet remembered. Halfway up the trail, rain began to fall light at first, then heavier. She pulled her jacket tighter, her breath quickening. The memory came clearer with each step. Stone stairs, damp moss, the sound of a wooden chime swinging somewhere unseen. When she reached the temple gate, she froze. The doors were open. Inside, everything was just as she remembered. The courtyard, the old bell, the gnarled pine tree leaning toward the west, and the scent, that unmistakable incense, neither sweet nor bitter. It wrapped around her like an embrace. She stepped inside, and her shoes echoed against the ancient stone. Huken was kneeling in front of the statue, just as he always had. He didn't turn when she entered. Shenli hesitated. Then softly, as if saying it to the air, she whispered, "I remembered." The monk turned. His eyes, though older, still held that quiet mirth. "I knew you would," he said. No more was spoken. Not yet. Sometimes words are not the first thing returned. They sat across from each other in the old tea room, where the walls were lined with scrolls faded by time, and a single clay teapot sat warming over a candle. The wind outside rustled the prayer flags like soft breath through linen. Shenli held her cup without drinking. Hukin poured in silence, never breaking eye contact, yet never pressing. She studied his hands, older, thinner, but steady like everything else about him. The same hands that had poured tea for her years ago when she was too raw to speak. "You look well," he said gently. "I forgot I ever wasn't," she replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, just the soft confusion of someone who had survived many selves. They drank in silence, and the steam from their cups curled up like invisible threads, weaving the moment together. Outside, the incense still burned. She looked toward the inner courtyard, where the trail of smoke rose toward the sky. It hadn't changed. Not its shape, not its rhythm, as if time had learned to move around it. "Did you light it every day?" she asked, the question leaving her lips before she could stop it. Hukin didn't answer right away. He turned his head slightly, as if listening for something far away. "I didn't need to," he said at last. "It never went out." Shenli blinked. "You mean it just kept burning?" He nodded. "Some prayers do." She exhaled through her nose, slow and measured, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "That's not possible. Is remembering possible?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, not because she didn't have one, but because the question lodged somewhere deeper than thought. They walked the grounds later that evening. The rain had passed, leaving the stones slick and fragrant. Shenli dragged her fingertips along the railing of the corridor, pausing beneath the overhang where she used to sit and watch the mist rise from the mountainside. She stopped. There, on the wooden ledge, was something small and unassuming, a ceramic cup. The same kind she had once used. It was upright now. "I thought I left it upside down," she murmured. "You did," Hukin said, stepping beside her. "I turned it over this morning." She turned to him slowly. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because it's not goodbye anymore." A sound caught in her throat, not quite a sob. She looked down at the cup, then back toward the altar hall, where the incense continued to rise silent, unwavering, eternal. Something within her shifted, like a door long closed, creaking open. Later that night, long after Hukin had gone to rest, Shenli sat alone in the temple's central hall. The candlelight flickered. The scent of the incense still lingered, curling into the shadows. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she bowed. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because the space inside her had made room, and something, perhaps a memory, perhaps a soul, had finally come home. The morning came softly, wrapped in a shawl of mist and birdsong. Shenli woke early, not because she had to, but because her body remembered the rhythm of the mountain, even if her mind was still catching up. The temple air was cool, but not cold. It felt clean in a way no city air ever did, like it hadn't been touched by expectation. She made her way to the outer garden, barefoot on the worn stone. Moss pressed up through the cracks, and dew kissed the skin of her feet. She paused at the edge of the pond, watching the koi move like dreams beneath the surface. Hukin was already awake, kneeling before the incense. She stood quietly behind him, not wishing to disturb. The trail of smoke curled upward unbroken, undisturbed. She watched it for a while, then finally asked the question that had tugged at her since her return. Master Hukin, was it ever really about me? His head tilted slightly, but he didn't turn. The incense? She nodded, unsure why her throat tightened. Yes, he said simply, but not only you. She stepped beside him, folding her legs and settling into the space beside the altar. Then who else? The ones who leave, the ones who forget, the ones who search. His voice was gentle, almost apologetic. The incense wasn't waiting for you. It was burning with you, even when you didn't know it. She looked at the smoke again, something stirring in her chest. I don't know if I believe in anything anymore. He smiled faintly. That's when belief becomes honest. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't press or pull. Shenli's mind wandered back to the life she had built in the city rows of books, the hum of neon, the pleasant ache of a day spent shelving stories. But all of it now felt like a photograph, real but somehow distant. Am I supposed to stay? She asked softly. Hukin looked at her, eyes warm. No, you're supposed to remember. That's all. But what if I forget again? Then you'll come back. Or not. The incense will still be burning. A laugh escaped her small, surprised. Is that faith? He shrugged. It's just what happens when you stop trying to hold on and simply let the scent rise. She didn't reply. Instead, she reached out, fingers hovering near the incense smoke. She didn't touch it, didn't need to. She only watched it rise, as steady as breath. That afternoon, she walked the mountain paths alone, the same way she once had, years ago. But this time, she didn't feel like she was escaping anything. She paused at a ledge overlooking the valley, wind curling her hair against her cheeks. Far below, the city shimmered, a suggestion rather than a reality. She closed her eyes and whispered, I forgive you. She wasn't sure who the words were for, but the wind carried them away, and that was enough. When she returned to the temple, Hukin was tending to the garden. He didn't look up, but he said, You'll leave tomorrow, won't you? Shenli nodded. He simply smiled. Then tonight, let the incense burn for you one more time. And she did. That night, as the stars blinked into view one by one, Shenli lay beneath the eaves, the scent of incense cradling her to sleep. This time she dreamed, not of what she had lost, but of what had always remained. When Shenli descended the mountain the next morning, she didn't look back, not out of defiance, but because she carried something with her now, something that didn't need stone walls or smoke to stay alive. The train ride was quiet. Her seat faced the rising sun, and the light flickered through the trees like a slow blinking eye. She rested her forehead against the window, fingers curled in her lap. There was no rush to return, no urgency, only movement. And that, she realized, was enough. The city greeted her with its usual noise and rush, but it no longer clung to her skin the way it used to. She walked the familiar streets with a strange softness. Same buildings, same faces, but now they passed through her like waves, not weights. The bookstore had gone untouched in her absence. Her coworker, Ellen, had covered for her without question, simply smiling when Shenli walked through the door. You look different, Ellen said, stacking new releases by the register. Shenli smiled. I think I remembered something I'd forgotten. Ellen didn't press. Some stories are not meant to be unwrapped. That evening, Shenli brewed tea in her apartment. The tiny space was quiet except for the hum of the water boiling. She opened the window slightly, letting in the night air. Her gaze drifted to the small ceramic cup she'd brought back from the temple, the same one she had once left behind. She placed it on the windowsill, upright. Then she reached into her bag and took out a small parcel Hukin had pressed into her hands before she left. Inside, wrapped in coarse cloth, was a stick of the incense. It looked ordinary now. No golden shimmer, no ancient glow, just a simple, slender stick. Still, she placed it in a shallow bowl and lit it. At first, nothing happened. Then a wisp of smoke rose, spiraling delicately into the air. It didn't smell the same in the city, not quite, but it stirred something in her chest all the same. Shenli sat with it. No music, no phone, just the quiet and the smoke. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to figure everything out. She didn't need to ask herself what came next, or how long this peace would last. The incense would burn, and eventually it would go out. That was enough. Sometimes remembrance was not a grand return, but a soft unfolding. A few days later, a customer came into the bookstore, a boy no older than 17, with wide eyes and shaky hands. He asked for something quiet, but not boring. Something that doesn't hurt to read. Shenli knew exactly what to give him. As she handed him the book, she said, "There's something in the silence between pages. That's where you'll find it." He blinked. "Find what?" She smiled. "What you forgot." He left, clutching the book like it might carry him somewhere safe. And Shenli returned to her shelf, the scent of phantom incense still lingering, even though the bowl was long cold. Because sometimes what never burns out isn't the incense at all. Weeks passed, then months. The incense bowl on Shenli's windowsill gathered a faint ring of ash, but she never moved it. Every few nights, she would sit beside it in the quiet, a single lamp casting long shadows over her books. She wouldn't always light a stick. Sometimes she just watched the empty bowl and remembered. She no longer feared forgetting. Life moved gently now. The city didn't rush her. The bookstore felt like a still lake in the middle of traffic. She noticed things she used to miss, the slant of sunlight on a shelf, the way customers hesitated before choosing, the softness in strangers' eyes. And though she never told anyone about the temple, she began leaving little markers, small gestures like offerings. She organized a shelf for poetry no one read. She slipped folded paper cranes into the spines of certain books. She brewed tea every afternoon and drank it slowly, even if customers came and went. Even if the phone rang. The incense remained in its bowl, unlit, yet somehow alive. One evening, a woman came into the shop holder, with graying hair tied in a neat bun, and hands that looked like they had spent years tending to something fragile. She browsed without hurry, pausing now and then at titles Shenli herself loved. Finally, she approached the counter. "Do you have anything about remembering?" the woman asked. Her voice trembled, but not from age, from something deeper, something searching. Shenli thought for a long moment, then nodded. She didn't speak. She simply stepped into the back room and returned with a slim volume, something quiet, forgotten, but full of presence. The woman opened it, read a few lines, then held it to her chest like a prayer. "Thank you," she whispered. Shenli only smiled. It's already inside you." The woman looked at her, eyes wet. "How do you know?" She tilted her head, her voice soft and certain. "Because the incense never burns out." That night, after closing the shop, Shenli walked through the city streets. Lights blinked from windows. A bus hissed at the curb. Laughter drifted from a nearby bar. It was all familiar, and yet everything felt touched by something invisible, a quiet thread weaving through it all. She stopped by the river. The moonlight painted the water silver, and the wind danced through her hair. She closed her eyes. In that moment, she felt the temple not as a place, but as a presence. The bell, the stairs, the courtyard pine, the scent of the incense, the steady warmth of Hukin's voice. All of it lived in her now, not as memory, but as marrow. She didn't need to go back, because she had never truly left. And somewhere on a mountain she might never climb again, a single stick of incense still burned. Or maybe it didn't. But that didn't matter anymore, because what remained was enough. The bookstore had become a place of pilgrimage, though no one called it that. People wandered in not just for books, but for something they couldn't quite name. Some stayed longer than necessary. Some returned again and again, never buying anything, only lingering near the poetry shelf or the small bowl of incense that Shenli kept tucked near the register. It was never lit, but its presence seemed to hush the air. Shenli had stopped trying to explain this. One rainy afternoon, a man arrived soaked through no umbrella, no coat. He moved slowly, as though each step had been weighed. Shenli noticed his eyes, the kind that had seen too much too fast. He browsed with a kind of reluctance, like he was waiting to be turned away. After a long while, he stopped before the incense bowl. "This place?" he murmured. "It smells like something I dreamed about once." Shenli didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached into the drawer and took out a folded piece of parchment, plain but warm from her hand. She pressed it into his palm and smiled. He opened it slowly. Inside was a poem, not by any famous author, just one she had written years ago when the forgetting had felt deepest. He read it once, then twice. Tears blurred his eyes. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The rain had stopped when he left. That night, Shenli couldn't sleep. The city was too still, too heavy. She lit a single stick of the temple incense, not because she needed comfort, but because she felt something stirring beneath the surface of her chest. The smoke rose straight into the ceiling, and as it did, she remembered the corridor behind the temple altar, the narrow path few had walked. Hukin had told her once that there were stories carved into the stone back there, old, faded things. Prayers from hands that had long returned to earth. In her mind's eye, she walked that corridor. She saw the names, the symbols, the deep grooves, where fingers had traced the same prayers again and again. And suddenly she understood something. The incense had never burned just for her. It had never belonged to any one person. It had simply offered its presence, as still and faithful as breath. She opened her eyes. The smoke was gone. Only the scent remained. That night, Shenli wrote, not for a customer, not for the store, just for herself. The words came gently, as if whispered from someplace deeper than memory. When she finished, she folded the page and placed it beside the incense bowl. She didn't know who it was meant for yet, but she knew eventually they would come. Autumn came quietly, like someone entering a room where grief had just left. The leaves in the park across from Shenli's apartment turned brittle gold, their edges curling like burnt offerings. She had taken to walking there in the mornings before the city fully woke, watching the trees let go with such effortless grace. One morning she noticed a girl sitting alone on the bench beneath the elm. Pale hoodie, sleeves covering her hands, gaze fixed on the sidewalk, like it might open and swallow her whole. Shenli passed by without speaking, but something stayed with her. The girl's stillness, the way her presence seemed to hum with something unspoken. The next day, the girl was there again, and the next. On the fourth day, Shenli brought tea. She didn't ask questions, just sat beside her, held out the cup. The girl took it, sipped, said nothing. That silence stretched over the weeks. Some days they spoke only a few words. Some days not even that. But gradually the girl's posture changed. Her shoulders soft. Her breath steadied. One chilly morning she finally said, "You don't ask why I'm here." Shenli smiled at the falling leaves. Sometimes the question is heavier than the answer. The girl stared at her for a long time. "I used to believe in things," she said, "but it got too loud. The world, my head, everything." Shenli nodded slowly. There's a kind of faith that doesn't need to be loud. The girl looked at her hands. "I forget how to feel safe." Shenli reached into her bag and pulled out a small tin. Inside, nestled in black silk, was a thin stick of incense. She held it out. "This helped me remember." The girl took it, cradling it like it might break. "What does it do?" She whispered. "It reminds you that something doesn't need to speak to be with you." That day they parted with a nod, no promises. A week passed, then two. Shenli didn't see the girl again until one morning she entered the bookstore. She looked different. The same hoodie, but now she stood taller. She walked straight to the counter and placed a folded piece of paper beside the register. "I lit it," she said. "I didn't expect anything, but it stayed with me." Shenli opened the note after the girl left. It was a poem, raw, hesitant, beautiful. She read it 3 times. Then she placed it in the drawer with the other stories, from those who had found something unspoken in the smoke. She didn't light incense that night. She didn't need to. Somewhere out there in an apartment not far from hers, another stick had burned. Another quiet had been made sacred, and the incense that never truly went out had found its way forward. It was early winter when the dream came again. Shenli was back at the temple, though it wasn't exactly the same. The stairs were longer, steeper, curling in on themselves like memory. The courtyard pine had shed all its needles, standing bare and solemn beneath a sky too wide for words. She walked barefoot across stone that pulsed with warmth, though snow flurried in the air. There were no monks, no voices, just the faint sound of something turning, slow and endless, like a prayer wheel in the dark. She found herself at the incense altar, but this time there was no bowl, no matches, only the scent. The incense had already burned, and still the air shimmered with its presence. She woke before dawn, breath shallow, heart steady. The room was quiet, but not empty. The dream had brought something back with it. On her desk, the incense bowl seemed slightly askew, though she hadn't touched it. She left it that way. That morning at the shop, she arrived early, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. She dusted the corners, rearranged shelves, opened windows despite the chill. And then she sat, alone, as the city yawned and stretched into day. A man entered just as she was about to close the door again. Older, not old, dressed in simple gray layers that caught the light like silk. He didn't look lost. He looked returned. They regarded each other for a moment. Then he said, "You kept the fire going." Shenli didn't ask how he knew. She gestured to the chair by the window. He sat, not like a guest, but like someone remembering how. "I lit it once," he said, gazing out at the street. "A long time ago. Didn't think it had done anything." Shenli tilted her head, but she remembered it. He nodded. "I didn't carry the set with me. I carried the stillness." For a while, they just sat there. Two people who had breathed the same smoke at different times, under different skies. Before he left, he took a small notebook from his coat. Inside was a sketch, the incense burning sideways, trailing smoke that curled into the shape of a sleeping face. He tore it out, gently. "Maybe someone else will need it," he said. She placed it behind the counter, beside the poems and folded letters and tiny notes from strangers who had all met something wordless in the flame. She didn't write about the man in her journal. Some things weren't stories. Some were just visits. That night, as she made tea, she stared at the incense bowl and whispered, "You were never mine." And the quiet answered back, "But I was always yours." Snow had begun to gather on the rooftops, softening the edges of the city. Shenli found herself watching it more than usual, how it blanketed fire escapes, made chimneys look like ancient relics, and hushed even the noisiest intersections. Everything was slower, like the world itself had decided to whisper. In the bookstore, customers came in bundled tight, cheeks flushed red, voices low with winter's stillness. Shenli had started leaving out a small tray of warm tea on the counter. No labels, no signs, just a quiet offering. Some people took a cup, some didn't, but everyone paused. One afternoon, a little boy came in, holding his grandfather's hand. Shenli had seen the older man before he collected translated poetry and always paid in coins. But the boy was new. He wandered the aisles like a cat, curious, skittish, drawn to corners. Eventually, he stopped in front of the incense bowl. He didn't touch it, just stared. Then he said, without turning around, "It's breathing." Shenli blinked. The grandfather chuckled from a few feet away. "He's been saying strange things lately. Dreams. Whispers. Kids make things up." But Shenli didn't think the boy was making anything up. She knelt down beside him. "What does it say?" she asked gently. The boy furrowed his brow. "Nothing in words. Just like it remembers me." Shenli smiled. "Maybe it does." Later, after they left, she sat with the incense bowl, wondering, could something really remember across lives? Across time? She thought of the corridor behind the altar, the names carved in stone, the deep hum of something that had no language. And she thought of the boy, how easily he had accepted the presence, how naturally he listened. That night, She dreamed of a child running through temple halls, bare feet on polished stone, a stick of incense clutched in one small hand, and someone laughing, not in mockery but in joy. When she woke, her chest ached, not with pain, but with the weight of something ancient. She lit incense, not for herself, for whoever had once run those halls, for whoever would again. The city had entered that strange in-between. Not quite winter, not yet spring. The snow hadn't melted, but the sun lingered longer now. It was a season of waiting, and Shenli felt it in her bones. Even the bookstore seemed to breathe slower, as if holding something in. She had started a new habit, closing early once a week to walk without purpose. No destination, no errands, just feet on pavement, eyes on nothing in particular. These walks had become sacred, though she never called them that. One Thursday, she found herself turning down an alley she'd never noticed before. It was narrow and crooked, with rusted balconies leaning over like eavesdropping neighbors. A single lantern flickered at the far end. As she walked, her breath puffed in front of her like a soft ghost. At the alley's end was a door. Wooden, old, no sign. Just a faint scent, familiar, but hard to place. She didn't knock. She simply stood there, heart thrumming in her palms. Then the door creaked open. No one stood behind it. Just a room filled with silence and the unmistakable scent of incense, her incense. Not a match, not similar. The same. She stepped inside. The walls were lined with shelves, but not books. Letters. Stacks of them. Some tied with ribbon, some stained with tears. And at the center, on a low wooden table, sat a bowl identical to hers. Smoke rose from it. Thin. Steady. A man appeared from the shadows, though his presence didn't startle her. He looked both old and young. Timeless in the way monks sometimes were. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he gestured to the bowl. "This flame has traveled far." Shenli nodded. "It found me. Then it kept me." He tilted his head. "And what have you done in return?" She thought for a moment. "I passed it on. In small ways. Quiet ways." He smiled. "That is the only way." They stood in silence as the smoke curled toward the ceiling. Then he handed her a folded note. "For when you forget again." She didn't open it. She didn't need to yet. When she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. "What is this place?" He met her eyes. "A room that remembers what people leave behind." She stepped into the cold. The alley was gone. Only the street remained. Only her breath. Only the faint scent that followed her home. That night she placed the note in the drawer with the others. Still unopened. Still waiting. Rain returned with a kind of gentleness that surprised her. It didn't lash or roar, just whispered against the windows, reminding the world how to soften. Shenli left the bookstore door propped open that day, letting the sound of water fill the space between pages and people. A woman entered around midday. She had one of those faces that looked familiar, though Shenli couldn't place her. She walked slowly, as though inside her own world, stopping occasionally to run her fingers along spines, like she was listening more than reading. Eventually, she reached the counter and asked, "Do you have anything on forgetting?" Shenli raised an eyebrow. The woman clarified, "Not memory loss, just forgetting who you are, forgetting who you were." Shenli didn't move toward a shelf. Instead, she reached under the counter and pulled out a small slip of parchment. A note left behind by someone else months ago unsigned, a single sentence. The self I grieved was never really gone, only quiet. She handed it over. The woman read it, once, then again. Tears welled, not from pain but from recognition. "I used to write," she said quietly. "Poems, mostly. Then life got loud, and I started answering to names that weren't mine." Shenli didn't respond with comfort, only stillness. The woman stood there for a while, breathing with the rain, the incense, the quiet. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a weathered notebook. "Maybe someone else needs these now." Shenli accepted it with both hands, as if it weighed something sacred. After she left, Shenli leafed through the pages. The writing was raw and strange and beautiful. Verses about rivers that never asked where they were going. About silence that didn't mean absence. About names whispered in dreams. She placed the notebook beside the incense bowl. No label. No explanation. Just presence. Later that evening, after the last customer had gone and the city had begun to fold in on itself, Shenli lit a single stick. The scent rose gently, coiling toward the ceiling, like a thought returning home. And she whispered, "For the names we gave up and the ones we're still remembering." The smoke didn't answer, but it stayed with her all the same. The days were beginning to stretch again. Shadows lingered just a little longer in the corners of the bookstore, and sunlight slipped across the wooden floor like it was learning to dance. Shenli felt it too, that strange pull between ending and beginning. Something old winding down. Something unnamed waiting its turn. One evening, just before closing, a young man arrived. He had the cautious posture of someone used to disappointment. He hesitated at the doorway, then crossed the threshold like it might collapse behind him. Shenli was shelving a stack of returned books and simply nodded in greeting. He didn't speak, just wandered, touched nothing. His presence was almost too quiet to notice, except for the way he kept glancing toward the incense bowl, as if it was somehow accusing him. After nearly an hour, he approached the counter. "I think I've been here before," he said. Shenli tilted her head. "And I don't remember why I left." She said nothing. He took a breath. "I was part of something. A practice. A temple, maybe. I let it go. For work, for a girl, for noise I thought was purpose. It didn't feel like a choice. But I never lit another stick after that." Shenli studied his face. There was no guilt there, just a soft ache, a wondering. "Do you still have it?" she asked. "The incense?" He nodded. "In a drawer I don't open." She reached behind the register and handed him a matchbox. It was old, the label faded. Temple issued. Familiar. He took it with both hands, as if it were heavy. "What if I light it?" he asked, "and nothing happens?" Shenli smiled. "Then at least you'll be with it when it doesn't." He laughed softly, a crack of light between clouds. Before he left, he slipped a note into the donation bowl near the window. Shenli didn't read it right away. She knew the timing mattered. That night, after sweeping and locking up, she unfolded the paper. It said, "I thought forgetting made me free, but I was only unrooted. I'm ready to grow again, even if it hurts." Shenli placed the note beneath the incense bowl. No ceremony, no words, just stillness. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the bowl hum quietly, like a bell being remembered. The night pressed against the window panes, but inside something stayed warm. The wind had changed again. It wasn't colder but sharper, more alert, as if the season was listening. Shenli stood behind the counter that morning, not quite sure what she was waiting for, only that something in the air felt expectant. A woman arrived just after opening. Tall, silver hair pulled back into a braid that brushed her spine. She wore a long black coat and carried a satchel made of red leather, worn and patched. She didn't browse, didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the counter and placed a single item in front of Shenli, a brass incense holder, shaped like a lotus. "I believe this was yours," the woman said softly. Shenli blinked. "I've never seen this before." The woman smiled. "Not in this life." Something in her tone made Shenli's skin prickle. Not fear, not discomfort, but recognition without memory. The woman continued, "It belonged to a keeper. Long ago. Passed from hand to hand. It listens. It remembers." Shenli touched the lotus gently. It was cool to the touch, but a warmth spread through her fingers as if the metal recalled fire. "Why bring it here?" she asked. The woman's eyes softened. "Because it's time." Then she turned and walked out, the bell above the door ringing once, like a single clear thought. Shenli examined the holder. Beneath the petals, etched so faintly it could have been breath, were the words, "Carry what burns without flame." She didn't place incense in it, not yet. Instead, she set it beside the original bowl, the one that had carried so many stories, and simply watched them both. That night, she dreamed. The temple again. But this time it was empty walls open to the stars, stone corridors overgrown with ivy and moonlight. She stood in the center, the brass lotus in her hand. All around her, small bowls began to glow. Not with fire, but with memory. Echoes. Prayers left behind in silence. A voice from nowhere and everywhere whispered, "You are not the flame. You are the keeper." When she awoke, the incense bowl and the brass holder sat side by side, unchanged. But the air in the shop felt clearer, lighter, as though something had finally arrived or returned. The bookstore had always been a kind of threshold, between noise and quiet, between seeking and surrender. But now something deeper was shifting. Shenli began to notice small changes, customers lingering longer without reason, the incense burning slower than before, the bowl feeling heavier in her hands. One afternoon, a student came in early 20s, eyes shadowed by too many late nights. He held a half-filled journal and a trembling voice. "I don't believe in anything," he said abruptly, the moment he reached the counter. "Not spirits, not souls, not signs, but this place." He trailed off, unsure whether to accuse or confess. Shenli didn't answer right away. She simply offered him tea. They sat near the window in silence. Outside, the wind played with the branches of a cherry tree just beginning to bud. The student finally said, "When I was a kid, I used to light incense with my grandmother. I didn't understand it. She'd say, It feeds what you can't see." He shook his head. "I thought it was nonsense. But now?" Shenli asked. He shrugged. "I still don't believe, but I miss it. And sometimes, when I walk past here, I feel like something's waiting for me." She leaned forward, resting her hands around the warm teacup. "Maybe belief isn't the point," she said softly. "Maybe presence is." He stared into the steam like it might carry an answer. "I'm afraid of starting again," he whispered. "So was the fire," Shenli said. "But it burned anyway." Before he left, he approached the incense bowl. Didn't touch it. Just bowed almost imperceptibly, like something inside him remembered how. That night, Shenli lit 2 sticks. One for her, one for the boy who didn't believe but still bowed. As the smoke curled, she thought about all the others who had passed through the store. The ones who had spoken, the ones who hadn't, the ones who only came once, left no trace, and yet somehow stayed. The bowl had never been a symbol. It had always been a bridge. And she had never been the guide, only the witness. Outside, the moon rose like an old friend, and Shenli whispered into the air, "Come home, whoever you are, however long it takes." The incense didn't flicker. It listened. The scent was changing, not in an obvious way, but like a familiar song played in a different key. Shenli noticed it first during her morning ritual. Same incense, same bowl. But when she lit the match and watched a tendril of smoke rise, it curled slower, lingered longer, as if the air itself had deepened. The city outside didn't seem to notice. People hurried past the shop windows in coats and conversation, unaware of the shift behind the glass. But inside, Shenli felt time folding in on itself. Everything was quieter, weightier. That afternoon, she received a letter. No return address. No signature. Inside was a single line, written in deep black ink. "When you are ready, burn this." Shenli held the paper to her chest. It pulsed like a heartbeat. She didn't know who had sent it, but the hand was familiar. Not from sight, but from something deeper. An echo. She didn't burn it. Not yet. Instead, she placed it in the lotus-shaped holder, the one that had been returned by the silver-haired woman. It fit perfectly, like it had always belonged there. Customers came and went unaware. A man searching for lost languages. A girl asking about ghost stories. A woman looking for books she'd already read, wanting to remember how they'd made her feel the first time. Each one paused, subtly, in front of the incense bowl. No one touched it. No one asked, but every single one inhaled. That evening, Shenli lit the paper. Not with fear, not even with curiosity, but with a sense of reunion. The flame consumed it gently, curling into smoke that didn't smell like ash. It smelled like pine forests, like temples in morning light, like old paper and dried lavender, like memory. She sat beside the bowl long after the smoke faded. No answers came, but something inside her settled, as if a door had finally closed, and another had opened just enough to let the breeze in. Later that night, as she turned off the lights, she paused by the bowl, whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for waiting." And somewhere in the hush, something whispered back, "Welcome back." The city seemed to breathe differently after the rain had passed, fresher, softer, as though it had been washed clean of some invisible weight. Shenli walked the familiar streets, the brass lotus holder tucked carefully beneath her coat. It was no longer just an object. It had become a companion, a talisman of sorts. She stopped at a quiet park where cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom. The petals drifted lazily on the breeze, delicate and fleeting. She sat on a bench, the holder resting on her lap, feeling the pulse of the day slow around her. A child ran past, chasing a bright red balloon, laughter spilling like sunlight. Shenli smiled, something simple and rare in the city's usual hurry. From her satchel, she pulled a folded piece of paper, a note from the young man who had come weeks before, the one who didn't believe but bowed anyway. It read, "I have begun to remember who I was. The flame I thought lost still flickers. Thank you for holding the light when I could not." She folded it carefully and placed it inside the lotus holder, beside the other messages and memories. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the park. Shenli felt the warmth settle deep within her chest. Tonight she would light the incense again, not to chase away darkness, but to honor the quiet persistence of light. She closed her eyes and breathed in the familiar scent, the smoke rising like a silent prayer. And in that moment she knew the story was never really about the flame burning out. It was about the ones who carry it through the dark. The days had softened into a slow, steady rhythm, like the turning of pages in a well-loved book. Shenli's bookstore had become more than a place to find stories. It was now a refuge, a silent witness to the journeys of many souls. One quiet morning, an elderly man arrived. His hands trembled slightly as he held a small, worn wooden box. He approached the counter and placed it gently before her. "This was my wife's," he said, voice thick with memory. "She loved incense," said it helped her speak to the past. Shenli nodded, understanding without needing more words. He opened the box, revealing a bundle of faded sticks, brittle but fragrant. "I can't light them anymore," he admitted. "But maybe you can." She took the box with care, feeling the weight of years and love pressed into its wood. That evening she lit one of the sticks from the box, placing it in the brass lotus holder. The smoke rose slowly, carrying with it whispers of old laughter, quiet conversations, and the gentle presence of a love that never truly left. As the scent filled the room, Shenli felt the circle of stories widen, the flame passing from one hand to another, never burning out, only transforming. The man's words lingered in her mind. Some flames don't need to roar to be alive. And with that, the bookstore breathed in deep, wrapped in the scent of memory and hope. The city outside was quieter than usual, wrapped in the soft hush that follows a gentle rain. Shenli sat behind her counter, eyes tracing the swirling smoke rising from the incense bowl. It was here, between the lingering scent and the flickering shadows, that the stories lived, carried softly on the breeze of memory. Tonight, the brass lotus holder rested beside the original bowl, both vessels of flame and remembrance. Over the weeks, they had gathered notes and tokens from visitors, small fragments of their journeys, hopes and quiet confessions, each one a thread woven into the tapestry of the shop's invisible soul. She reached for the delicate stack of papers tucked beneath the holder, the collected words of those who had come seeking forgetting, remembering, or simply a place to be still. Shenli began to read aloud, her voice low and even, letting the words drift like the incense smoke. I thought forgetting made me free, but I was only unrooted. I am ready to grow again, even if it hurts. The self I grieved was never really gone, only quiet. Some flames don't need to roar to be alive. With each phrase, the room seemed to breathe a little easier, the past folding gently into the present. Outside, the moon cast a silver glow, a silent witness to the unspoken stories held within these walls. The incense curled upward, weaving through shadows and light, a bridge between moments lost and found. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story,